The Power Hour is on the air, live streaming you on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. I'm your host, Michael Bishop, and thank you for joining me on this Monday evening. It's great to be back. It's great to have everybody coming into the chat. Looking forward to having a great show tonight. Got a lot of jam-packed information, news, and hot topics to get to tonight. Getting a few messages earlier in the chat. It's great to see everybody. Looking forward to the program. As always, great seeing you, Mom. Love seeing you on the show. Titan E, how much he going to get paid? And he also said, I am looking forward to him getting paid. Well, Titan E, we're definitely going to talk about that. But first, we've got a special guest tonight. Haven't had a chance to talk to our good buddy since after the draft, but we're great to have him on. As the host of the 615 podcast, please welcome to the show our good friend, Lee Hillis. Lee, welcome to the Power Hour.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been a while since we got to talk, buddy. I mean,
it has.
We haven't had a chance to just sit down and talk since after the draft, and I know there's just so much craziness that happened, but
yeah,
especially just from the standpoint of knowing that the whole structure of this team basically just drastically changed overnight, and that Tennessee's future looks somewhat questionable in certain areas. So what would you say to that claim?
That I would agree with. That our that it looks completely different now. Our future does. We were thinking, it's going to be AJ Brown and as the number one receiver in that receiving core, but now the question is, who will be that number one? Is it going to be Robert Woods, or are they going to bring another veteran in?
And with the slew of veterans sitting and waiting to make a decision on where they would potentially like to go, what do you think would be the best fit for the Titans if one of these veterans go to the team? And who would you say would be the best fit?
Well, I know there's a lot of speculation about who could be that piece. And there's really only a couple names that would come to mind. One of them has to be Odell Beckham, who could be a deep threat right there with Robert Woods.
And an interesting fit that would be with OBJ coming into Tennessee. Could definitely step in, definitely contribute. But we will speak a little bit about that later on a certain other news topic. But Lee, we got a lot of news going on throughout the league, despite some slow hiccups going on. So what do you say we jump into it?
Let's do it.
Well, once again, welcome everybody in. Welcome to the Power Hour. I'm your host, Michael Bishop. Joining us, Lee Hillis of the 615 podcast. And let's get into our top news. Well, Lee, to start out, contract talks are one of the biggest focal point for some teams. So let's just start with one of the biggest ones right now. And one of the most interesting ones that I would have to say. Basically, Lamar Jackson is acting as his own agent and setting up his future. So along the lines, it's been kind of quiet on both sides with just some small droplets of news that there is some headway being made. But along the lines, do you think this is a good move for Lamar Jackson representing himself?
That's a good question, because if you think about it, he's representing himself, which means he doesn't have to pay the typical fee or what an agent would make. He would be able to keep that in his pocket. So is it smart? Yeah, because you don't have to really pay an agent. That money's staying in your pocket.
Definitely a great point there. But others would argue also that, there could be just legal things that he misinterprets. There could be mistakes made on his part. So you would hope that he's got a good system to where people could understand that kind of language going forward, especially in contracts. What's something you think he should have to look out for, especially in these negotiations, so that he doesn't miss out on making as much money as possible?
Well, of course, I'm no legal expert, but the thing that I would look out for is the fine print. Like, most contracts will have that really small fine print of like the contract that I think makes the most now. Just give an example is Tannehill. He's set to make right around 38 million this year. But there's an out after this season. So he just signed what was like a 4-year contract, I think.
I believe you're right.
And there was an out after 3 years. So as I said, the thing that if I'm Lamar, the one thing I am trying to find and look at heavily is the fine print.
And of course, this being a very unique situation, most players having an agent to comp them, especially in these situations, so they can focus mostly on trying to prepare themselves for the offseason and get ready for training camp. So the biggest question is, how would a contract for Lamar Jackson look?
Well, with what Lamar has done, yeah, he has a playoff win. Whoop-de-doo. But if I'm Lamar Jackson or if I'm the Ravens, what I would be doing is I'd probably go a 4. Well, don't forget they could pick up his 5th-year option. They could have picked up his 5th-year option, did they?
Would have to check my stats, but I haven't heard anything that they have.
So he's basically playing out the rest of his rookie contract without that stability of a 5th-year option. So if I'm Baltimore, where I would go is I'd probably go around 4 years, about 66, 67 million with 48 million guaranteed.
And that's an interesting number. I would basically say, are you basing that number on basically just his ability from just making plays as a runner?
I think that's one of the biggest reasons, because if you look, Lamar, he has the ability to pull it down and run if he feels pressured. And that's his greatest strength. His weakness is being able to find open receivers and hit them, but also read a defense, a secondary.
And I guess the biggest question going forward is, could we potentially see a deal be done before the beginning of the season starting?
That's a good question. Could we? I think we could. Is it a long shot? Yeah. But could it be done? Yes, it could.
Lamar Jackson, one of the NFL players and one of the premier quarterbacks, especially looking to get paid, hopefully before his contract is up. The Ravens certainly want to get it done, and hopefully they do it in a timely fashion. Hitting our next story, it appears that there's some fines going around, especially with teams that were doing extracurricular activities, that the Cowboys, the Texans, and the Commanders have all been fined right around $200,000 between the three of them for extracurricular activities between OTAs and the mini camps. And Lee, I know in certain circumstances it's hard to misinterpret rules and basically try and get away with small things that most coaches would try and get away with, that they could get away with in previous years. So, what's the difference in these previous times that we're in now that makes it more difficult to do more contact?
Well, I think a big part of it is the safety aspect of the game. I feel like there's more of as I said, a safety aspect going into the game nowadays. And they don't really want players getting hurt from contact before training camp even starts. So I think that's a big part of what the NFL is trying to prove is, hey, we need to cut the contact back until you hit training camp or even preseason.
And I find it interesting that basically the three coaches that had been fined were coaches that have been in the league for quite over a decade, really. So this shouldn't have come as any surprise to them. But do you think it's just old G coaches just trying to use their approach and try and get a leg up on a competition?
I think it is because, as most will know, Ron Rivera started out west in Los Angeles or San Diego, went to Carolina, so he's familiar enough that does it surprise me that he would do this? No, but it does. On the other hand, do I think it's the old style of coaching still in there? Definitely.
And could we potentially see other coaches be fined by similar situations like this going forward? Or do you think this might just get a few of their attention and hopefully just reduce that problem?
It would be surprising me over the next 2 or 3 weeks seeing more fines come down. Would it surprise me? No. But do I think this is a learning point for coaches in the league? Definitely. It is.
And the NFL is showing that it's not afraid to hand down fines even to the most seasoned head coaches. Hopefully, this will be a lesson for other ones as they progress throughout the year. And in breaking news, it would appear that Richard Sherman and the people at Prime Video are basically going to add him to their studio. Yes, Richard Sherman will be one of the analysts on Thursday Night Football. And I think this is a pretty good move, Lee. I think he's got a great personality. And really, he has just a great mental stability for television. So, what would your
Yeah,
take be with this?
I agree. For Prime Video, they're getting an incredible guy who knows the game. Not saying the other guys on Prime Video don't know the game, but he's been in the league. He's been around the league, and he knows the game inside and out. So they're getting a really incredible player and possibly a really good analyst, and proved to be big for Tony Romo when he went to CBS.
And Richard Sherman, a Stanford graduate, is very well spoken, knows an entire bookshelf of just knowledge of the game of football. I just feel that the NFL looks for personalities that people can relate to, that are engaging and fun to the game. Would you consider this Sherman hire a home run hit?
Definitely. He, as you said, he's a Stanford grad. He knows the game inside and out. And so yeah, it's a home run for Prom.
And I know they're still trying to find a few other people to add to that position because you got to have a good table, especially when having a Thursday night game, prime time, and Amazon wants to do this right. Who do you think would be a good fit at that table as well?
There's for sure at least two guys that I could mention. Um, the one that really comes to mind, Peyton Manning would be a good one. Went to UT, NFL Hall of Famer. Another name that really comes to mind is another quarterback, Drew Brees, who's no longer with NBC.
Definitely two good names that would be an addition to the prime table. Thursday Night Football getting a really good one with Richard Sherman, but also he has stated he will be open to play again if the opportunity arises. So, could you see somebody potentially want Sherman service anywhere?
I could. It depends on the contract. Top three teams for me. Starting number three, I would probably have to go the New York Jets because their secondary really needs help. Could he be a viable veteran option for the Jets? Yes. Could I see him going to New York if the money's right? Number two, I could possibly see two AFC South teams right here at 1 and 2. Number two, I could see possibly Houston. Because, of course, last season they lost a big piece of that in their coverage group in Zach Cunningham. Came to Tennessee, and they really need help on the back end looking at the receivers that are in this division. Robert Woods, Michael Pittman Jr., and the list can go on. And then number one, it might not surprise y'all. I'm going to say Tennessee because there's a lot of uncertainty in that cornerback room. Who's going to be your number two corner? Is it Caleb Farley? Do you trust him to come out and show up? It wouldn't hurt. The reason I'm saying Tennessee, it would not hurt to bring and put some more veteran leadership in that secondary with the likes of Kevin Byard and Christian Fulton.
And that's a good top three. One team that I would add as an honorable mention would potentially be the Cleveland Browns. I think that you add extra help in the secondary to a defense that already looks pretty stout coming into the season.
With Greedy Williams, who I think they drafted in 2019.
I believe you're right.
That would actually not be a bad move for them if they could get him. As I said, the reason I had those three places, that's if the money's right.
And that'll definitely be on Richard's mind if he decides to return to the league. But as of now, a pretty good gig with Thursday Night Football.
And my bottom dollar for a guy like Richard Sherman, yeah, he's getting up there in age. My bottom dollar is somewhere around the $6.5 to $8 million range.
And I think that's a good mark for him. I think he'll come back at the right price. And I think along those lines, I think the best situation going forward for him is to go with a team that could contend potentially. But if they can give him the most money, I don't think he'll turn it down.
And that's why that going into the whole thought process. That's why I put Tennessee in there. Because one, Tennessee's a contender.
No argument here. And it'll be interesting to see if Sherman does return to the league. But still, I do look forward to seeing his antics on Thursday Night Football. Hitting our next news story, and of course, it comes to no surprise. Deshaun Watson continues to roll through the league news, unfortunately. And of course, the last few days, we've heard whispers that potentially the NFL is looking to suspend Watson for a year. When it will be coming, that's the hard part to say. But Lee, I would have to ask you first, what would be your take on this?
If it does happen, that is, as you said, the question's when. When would this come? Could I see it happening? I could. With all the allegations that have came against him, he now has 24 counts on him.
And it would be 26 that Sports Illustrated had reported that 2 are potentially coming forward. So that adds the total up now.
Wow. So could I see him getting suspended? Definitely. Which means Cleveland would have to rely on Baker Mayfield.
Which that brings me up to my next point. And I think if you're Cleveland, that's a very major point to be made. Will Baker Mayfield want to play for the Cleveland Browns after everything that's been transpired over the last 3 months?
That is hard to answer because there are a couple of teams that if they decide to make a trade that really need a quarterback. And one of those teams is the Carolina Panthers.
And another great point made, but unfortunately, Cleveland doesn't look like they would eat up a mass part of Baker Mayfield's contract to move him, which is what's stalling in some minds of these analysts that if Cleveland were to pay some of this off on his current contract, then teams would be able to go ahead and make the trade. But that seems to be the holdup at this point. So would this basically put Cleveland under the knife and have to move quickly, especially if the Watson suspension is all but imminent?
I think it would. I think it could possibly be the death of Cleveland for the season because you see the ability that Deshaun Watson has. to me, Deshaun is an older version of Lamar Jackson, easily.
And of course, Cleveland wasn't afraid to go out and make a deal for him to make the trade because they were trying to basically get that leg up in competition. But as of always, it seems like Jimmy Haslam and company once again didn't do their homework, their due diligence, and now it looks like they could be holding the bag for this. And even if the situation worsens for Watson, if they were to cut him, that would be $194 million they'd have to eat. So, Lee, if you were in Cleveland's situation, and I know it's a tall order to answer, but what would be the best move to go forward?
As you said, that's a tough one to answer. For me personally, I would tell Deshaun, if they give you the suspension, take it. And I would let him sit. I would let him sit that year and run with Mayfield. And then for me, it depends on what Baker is expected to make next year. If it's chump change like $9 million, I would cut him loose.
And Cleveland continues to look uncertain of their future with pending news that Deshaun Watson could be suspended. When we'll find out inevitably sooner or later. But Cleveland definitely looks like more trouble is coming, unfortunately. And in our final bit of news today, it looks like OBJ will be back this season, but it doesn't look like till October. Yes, he's mending from an ACL tear, and unfortunately, with that, it's going to take a great deal of rehab and recovery. And from what it looks like, the team will potentially signs him, will potentially get him right about mid-October. So, Lee, if you're a team that's looking for a receiver that's got agile hands and is elusive, here's your guy. But I guess one of the bigger questions is, would the Rams find a way to scrape up some change to keep him around for maybe just one more year?
That's right there. That's a good question to think about. Do I think the Rams do it? Big possibility on a veteran minimum because he's coming in so late in the year.
And with the talent that he has, it's not that he's short of any going anywhere. I mean, you've heard teams like Tampa Bay, even New England, look very interested in bringing him in. So, along the lines, I think OBJ won't go anywhere unless it comes down to the two things. One's going to be price, and the second one's going to be contendingship. And you've got to have those two in key to basically lock down his service. So, if you had to pick three teams right now that could potentially land his service, which three would it be and why?
Well, one of them I would have to. I'm going to put this team at 3. I'm going to say Tennessee at 3. Could money be an issue? Yes, because you're tight right now on cap space, and the one pro that could be bringing him here is he could partner up with Robert Woods when he gets back, because right now we don't have a true number one. Number 2 spot that I would go has to be Tampa Bay. They're a contender as long as Tom Brady's there.
That's true.
And then that's the one. That's the only reason. That's the only one for Tampa Bay is because Tom Brady's there. As long as Tom Brady is in Tampa, they're a contender. And the last one, the number 1 spot for me that I could see him landing has to be New England. Do they have some big question marks at receiver? Yes. They just parted ways with N'Keal Harry, trade for Devontae Parker from Miami. And the big, because like, who else do they really have? Nobody worth mentioning. But you have a young quarterback in Mac Jones who could use an agile physical weapon like OBJ. Also with a head coach like Bill Belichick. But the big question, who will be their offense coordinator this season?
And that's another great point you make. And from what it seems, Matt Patricia's name has arisen as the favorite right now to be the offensive coordinator.
Yeah. And is that interesting to me? Yeah, because he's mostly a defensive guy.
Which is a great point. And along the lines, Matt Patricia, despite his head coaching tenure with the Detroit Lions, Patricia's a smart coach. There's a reason why the New England defense was dominant as it was, even taking consideration that Belichick was there. But Patricia has the ability to make good game making decisions. The problem is when he went to Detroit, like most assistants do, they try to be Belichick. They try to implement the Patriot way into a system that just doesn't work.
And speaking of the Belichick way, it's obviously working here in Nashville.
And that's a great point. But one thing I do point out is, like all the others that have tried, Vrabel knows who he is and he knows what he wants to accomplish, while the others are basically just carbon copies that try to just dance the same dance, just with a different partner in a different location. Unfortunately, it doesn't work out.
But then you also have to look at the front office personnel for Tennessee. John Robinson spent the first bit of his career in the front office up in New England, so he knows how to build a team because he's set under Robert Kraft.
So sometimes picking from the New England tree can bring you pretty good results. You just have to pick. You have to pick the right fruit and not the best looking fruit. In some cases, the best looking fruit doesn't always pan out.
Like Julio Jones.
Exactly. Well, all right, guys, we're going to take a quick 30-second break, and we come back. We're going to get to the meat and potatoes of the discussion tonight. Jeffery Simmons' contract. It is the big distraction so much in the Titan universe that we need to sit down, talk about it, and find the best number for our future all-star defensive lineman. So I'm Michael Bishop with the Power Hour, and we'll be back in 30 seconds. The Power Hour is on the air, live streaming to you on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. I'm your host, Michael Bishop, and thank you for joining us on this Monday evening. It is great to have everybody in on the chat. Got a few people. We got to get to some of these messages. I read them, but I promise you guys, I'll get them up on the screen. Lou, man, it's always great seeing you on the show. Always great getting your input. Love having you on. And our good buddy Al Pierce, as always. Tighten up, as always. Good seeing you. Got a good chat going today. But of course, we've got to hand that to our special guest tonight, Lee Hillis of the 615 podcast. Lee, it is great having you in tonight and getting your insight. Definitely want to give you a chance to shout out to all the fans. Make sure they get a chance to find you on all your social media platforms.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at _615 podcast, on Twitter at podcast615, and you can also find me on TikTok. It just hit 1,000 about a month ago. at Lee Hillis on TikTok.
One of the best insiders that you could find in the Titan universe, giving you all the insight and entertaining. Check him out on his TikToks. Enjoy him so much. Always enjoy his shows too. And Lee, of course, you got a huge show coming up. Wanted to make sure that you gave a shout out and let them know about that as well.
Yeah, so we have a huge media roundtable coming up on June 29th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central. And our guests are Jill Jelnick from Fox 17 in Nashville, Kayla Anderson from WKRN, and Jonathan Hutton from Outkick 360. And we're talking training camp battles. And we might jump into Tennessee and Vanderbilt baseball, maybe.
Getting some exclusive here. Lee Hillis hosting a huge roundtable coming up next week, this Wednesday. Make sure that you catch it. He is going to give you all the insight with his expert panel on board. He's going to give you the goods. Don't want to miss it. And, of course, I want to thank you all for joining us on the show tonight. And don't forget, if you love the show, help it grow. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and TikTok at the Power Hour 615. Don't forget, we're also doing a giveaway. I am going to give away a brand spanking new Mitchell & Ness Eddie George jersey. Oh, it's so beautiful. I could show it to you if I could, but I got it safely stowed away. I promise you I have it. But don't forget, you can only enter the contest if you subscribe to the YouTube page. Make sure you ring the bell for notifications too. And you hit our Twitter page and follow us there and use the hashtag Power Hour Giveaway. That's how you enter. That's all you have to do. I'm not going to make it complicated on y'all. That's what I want to do. This is a beautiful jersey. I want to send you out into the regular season the right way, in style. And by God, you're going to look flash as soon as I send you out there in that thing. So please help me give it away. We're trying to do that. I'm looking out for you. All right, Lee, let's go ahead and jump into it. The big topic of discussion tonight, Jeffery Simmons is going to be potentially a multi-million-dollar man, but how much will the multi-million-dollar contract be? So let's get started. Well, as we all know, Jeffery Simmons has been a huge discussion piece going forward. And along the lines, he's going to be eventually either not if one of the highest paid or maybe the highest paid defensive lineman in the league, depending on how contract negotiations go. But let's start with how they basically came to be. It all started basically right around about the middle of May, I believe that's right, Lee.
I think so. And of course, as we should mention, Titans have picked up his 5th-year option.
And that was key. That's basically what started everything. And usually in these situations, when a player's 5th-year option gets opted to be picked up, that kind of signals two things. Either they're going to give them a play and watch year, or it's going to be a contract year where they try and get one worked out as soon as possible. So speculation began. And along those lines, there was a lot of speculation going forward. And Lee, I know we saw some rumors and everything and whatnot. So for you, what was the most entertaining one going around the Titan Twitterverse?
I haven't really looked into much on that standpoint, but I would like to see him get a huge payday, which, of course, later on in this, I do have numbers from around the league.
And we're definitely going to get into the numbers aspect of it. But you got to set the narrative just a little bit just to entertain. And one of the big ones that came out, I believe that was on Thursday from Teron Davenport, that Simmons is retained representative for his next contract. In that tweet, with the help of his uncle Jason Hatcher, a former Pro Bowl defensive end, Jeffery Simmons is retained Walking Business Sports Group, a team of advisors, negotiators to work out his next contract. The group includes NFL agent Paul Roselier, a seasoned attorney with 12 years of legal experience. Taylor Rosier, a Southern University Law Center graduate, spent the early part of his career at Willie Gashi LLP. I'm sorry if I butchered that, where he had gained significant knowledge of the collective bargaining agreement. As the firm played a role in representing the NFLPA during the lockout, 5-time Pro Bowler Andre Girard will also serve an advisory role, and some very premier names in that tweet. So, Lee, what would you take from that situation?
Uh, I think they're serious about getting something done. Don't know what exactly deal wise, but I think they're getting serious about Jeff staying here long term.
And the fact that he had retained such help, such as Andre Gerard and Jason Hatcher, two former Cowboys that have exclusive knowledge of how to do negotiations, especially with somebody very shrewd in making
Like
contracts.
like Jerry Jones.
Exactly. So you have to like how this is shaping up for Jeffery Simmons, that he's getting people that have had big paydays and understand what it takes to move the needle.
Yeah, it definitely helps having someone who's been on that end of it, on the player end of it, coming in and helping you out on that end of it from a player aspect of it.
So a group armed with a seasoned attorney and two former NFL players, it seems like things will be going in the right direction. But not everybody has a positive outlook. And fortunately, it seems that one of them was a former Tennessee Titan, and he definitely made his voice heard on the Durant, Jonick and Shea show on 1025, the game ESPN. And Albert Haynesworth basically made it said, they just don't want to pay defensive linemen. And of course, we can start with a lot of places on this. And Lee, I'll let you jump on this first. So, what do you take of Albert's, you know, discussion on the subject?
Well, I would say the reason they don't want to pay defensive linemen, look what happened with Albert Haynesworth. They gave him a huge payday, and he stunk it up. But Big Jeff is different. He's built different. He shows up on time. He does everything the Titans ask him to do. He stays at weight. Albert, when he was playing, he would come into camp 40, 50 pounds overweight.
And along the lines, there's a lot of situations that basically led to Albert Haynesworth leaving. I think Jim Schwartz leaving for Detroit was one of the key motivation
Most
points for
likely.
him of leaving.
Most
And
likely.
the second one, they just never met on the right terms of money. And back then, if I remember correctly, Tennessee was willing to pay him right around $40 million. So, not a bad deal for a guy of his caliber, but let's be honest,
No.
Albert Haynesworth had one good year where he wasn't consistently in trouble.
And, of course, Albert Haynesworth had his injuries. But what NFL player does it? But it seemed like constantly Albert Haynesworth was down. He was injured. He was out of games.
Agreed. Even his best year, he missed 3 games.
Yeah, and got got sent to Washington. He he stunk it up there. Played, I think he played New England. Stunk it up there. He stunk it up everywhere he went.
And it was really just along the lines of just, a lot of key factors there. I think one was work ethic. I think he just wasn't with the right people. He wasn't in the right system with Washington. You know, a 3-4 was never going to fit him properly. And that was one of the biggest problems. And
Well, well,
go ahead.
that's what Tennessee ran under Jim Schwartz.
Well, Shorts ran a 4-3.
I thought he was a 3-4 guy.
No, Tennessee didn't start running a 3-4 till they started working with Ray Horton. So Schwartz initially
Okay.
ran a 4-3.
And then of course you also have to think about Tom Dick LeBeau, who was famous for the 4-3 or 3-4, along with Dean Pease.
Agreed. And the craziest thing here is what kind of ties this situation in such a weird little knot is the fact that Albert Haynesworth, the biggest thing that he's remembered for is not his playing career or even the fact that he busted out. Some people mainly remember him for stomping on the head of Andre Gerard, the player that is representing Jeffery Simmons right now.
And
you can't make this up.
And the reason I think that Albert made this snide remark is, and it's safe to say that Albert is a little bit salty that Jeff is better than what Albert was, in my mind.
And I mean, despite whatever it is, I just feel Albert was in a different time and age. The defensive lineman wasn't respected as they are now. It's a harder position to fill because generally you have certain guys that fall late in the first round of the draft, like an Aaron Donald, who didn't get drafted until 14. Now he's arguably the best defensive player in the league.
And then also look at Big Jeff. Jeff is arguably a top 3 defensive lineman. And he wasn't picked till, I think, 19?
That's right. And it was because of, the injury and a legal situation where he did fall. But he's been a great, upstanding citizen for the community and the league.
Yep.
And he's been doing his job.
Exactly. I think Jeff deserves to get his payday. A huge payday.
And of course, everybody's foaming at the mouth to see what we think that would look like. So to move the needle forward, you have to understand that the certain defensive linemen have been paid a pretty penny, especially to lock up. So I'll start with my top 3 in the defensive tackle position. And of course, you have Aaron Donald with his renegotiated deal at $31 million a year. DeForest Buckner at $21 million is the next closest paid defensive lineman, and Chris Jones at $20 million a year for Kansas City.
And then you can also throw Jonathan Allen in there, making $18 million a year. And then and then the 5th ranked defensive lineman pay wise is Vita Vea, making roughly $17.8 million a year.
Which the funny thing is, out of the 3 that I have listed, Jonathan Allen has the highest signing bonus out of all 3 of them, which I think was at about, if I'm correct, is it $30 million?
I think so. And because, of course, I'm looking at Spot Track. Signing bonus was $30 million. His guaranteed at signing was 31, basically roughly, it's a little more than 31 million is what he was due at signing.
So it's already shown that this market is growing. So it now makes sense why Albert Haynesworth might be a little salty and throwing a little shade at the situation. But in this new era of the league where you have a more high-passing octane offense, you have to have defenders that can play well and get to the quarterback and make interceptions. So in this instance, Tennessee has, a grinder that's basically going to go out and destroy the offensive line and quarterbacks.
Yeah, and he was a big reason, and Titans fans might hate me for this, he's a big reason we stayed in that game at Cincinnati.
He was.
He found a way to push the middle of the pocket and force Joe Burrow to get outside. And then, you have guys like Bud Dupree and Harold Landry. And, of course, Harold Landry just got paid.
I mean, the biggest thing going forward is When Mike Vrabel started building this team, he knew he needed a defense that was going to compete against some of the best offenses in the league. And we got a small taste of that in the divisional round game against Cincinnati. You saw a lot of explosive plays. You saw a defense that was making the quarterback uncomfortable. Despite the fact he got 300 yards, it was not an easy 300-yard game for him at all.
Yeah, that was probably the hardest team he's had to face outside of the LA Rams.
And of course, adding up to the big question that everybody wants answered, Lee, what should Jeffery Simmons be making in this new contract?
Well, that's a huge question. Look, based on his stats, he hypothetically, I would say, put him in probably around the 4 or 5 year range, making around $100 million.
And I'll get to some of these comments because they're pretty good, especially Mark Jones. He's definitely putting his 2 cents in. So I'll get to you, Mark. So sorry for the wait. Says Albert Haynesworth win the decline after getting paid by the Washington team. Yes, I agree with that. Mark says he sees Jeff getting about a 4-year, $98 million contract, 24 per year. And of course, he also brings up the Bills game. He made the stop on 4th down to get the win of that game. Another great point.
And so I just did the math. So if they were to do $100 million over 4 years, that's $25 million a year. So I would say the 4 years, $100 million, I would say somewhere in the ballpark of around 58 to 62 million guaranteed.
And that is a high guarantee. But some people have said that you would probably have to get a higher guarantee this year. But I'm one of the few that feel that you don't have to go too wild. It's just get him right over the hump.
Well, if you look at it, salary cap in 2023 goes up more because the new TV deals go into effect for ESPN. ABC is now going to be in on that.
That's right.
CBS, Amazon, along with NFL Network.
So there's definitely more money there to be coming in. So that definitely moves the needle up. And they're still potentially looking for other streaming services that they could add on in the near future.
Yeah, that, and of course, I've heard rumors. I'm not sure how true they are, but I've heard the NFL is fixing to start their own streaming service, NFL Plus, in 2025.
Which that would be a very good situation for them, where they wouldn't have to deal with the contract money on others. That's more money in-house.
Which you would find like NFL podcasts, like a bunch like the other like professional NFL podcasts own.
So along those lines, definitely a lot of money to be made in there. So your final contract number for Big Jeff, what was that officially?
It was $25 million a year.
How many years?
4 years, $100 million.
Okay. So Lee locks his in 4 years at $100 million. I took a different road and came to this conclusion. At 25, I need a guy that's going to be there for the long haul. And I'm going to lock him down for a 6-year, $147 million deal. And I will guarantee him $36 million in a signing bonus and make him 24.5 a year.
Which, hypothetically, if you looked at all the numbers, that would put him at number 2.
Which is right where he should be. I'm not saying that he's not better than Aaron Donald. He could be. But Aaron Donald is in a category of his own.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a hard sell for a player that hasn't accomplished what Aaron Donald has already.
Like, let's, of course, run back to the top 3. Aaron Donald making roughly $31 million, a little more than $31 million a year. DeForest Buckner there at 2, making 21, and Chris Jones making 20.
And with Aaron Donald's contract, there's more incentive base if he decides to stay past the original contract here. So that could go up if he decides to opt back in for the final years of his contract.
Which he's talked about retirement. He's done everything you can think of. He's won a Super Bowl. What more can you do when you're Aaron Donald?
Not much. I mean, when you've been named to 8 consecutive Pro Bowls and you're right on the level of basically Lawrence Taylor, what can you do?
Because I'm going to say this. Aaron Donald is a future Hall of Famer. And I truly believe he is.
I don't question that one bit. But along those lines, and Mark Jones brought up an interesting point, and it's the salary cap last year. When we played the Rams, Big Jeff was the player that stood out, not Aaron Donald.
Exactly.
And that's a fine point, Mark. But here's the thing. Aaron Donald won a Super Bowl. Aaron Donald's been to 2 Super Bowls. Aaron Donald has won to 8 consecutive defensive player. I'm sorry. He's won 8 consecutive Pro Bowl appearances, and he's been the defensive player of the year. How he's not won an MVP on his own is laughable.
Well, if you think about it, and most would argue, and I have to agree with this, MVP is mostly a quarterback one award.
It is.
Because if you look back to the NFL MVPs, you have maybe back to the early 2000s, maybe 2 people that were not a quarterback that won the MVP.
And that's really, on a previous show that I discussed, the MVP format needs to be redone, where the quarterback award needs to be its own thing, kind of like the Cy Young in baseball.
Yeah.
It just makes more sense. But that's another show and another day. But along the lines on paying a guy like Jeffery Simmons, I think what Lee gave out was a fair number. I think mine's a fair number as well. And along those lines, you have to pay a guy what he's worth. But it's hard to overpay them, especially when the top player in their field has already achieved so much.
Exactly. If you overpay him, you look crazy. If you underpay him, you look even crazier.
And Mark brings up when you have all the players the Rams do, and they don't seem to have the cap to worry about it. Well, Mark, they do have a cap. And that's what I'm going to continue to say to everybody. The salary cap exists. The Rams are just in a very good situation where guys are taking these deals that are very team friendly.
Well, look at this. Kansas City, they seem to never have cap. But they find a way to work around it.
When you contend, it's really easy to find money, especially when a lot of guys, like I said, come on team-friendly deals. That's why you have guys in Cleveland or in Kansas City and right now in Los Angeles and Tampa Bay. They go there, they make money, but believe me, they're better deals that they get in the long term of things because these teams aren't really suffering that much. It's a win now league, and they're winning now with it.
Hang on, I'm doing some math real quick.
Lou Man gives up a good point here. He says he'd give $30.2 million a year for 3 years. I don't know, Lou. I'd want to give him at least 4 or 5 years. I mean, 3 years goes by quick in the NFL.
And I did the math on that. That's 90.6 million. But I'm just gonna go 5 years. That's 151 million at 30.2 million a year.
And Mark says, isn't it strange the last two Super Bowls have been won by the hosting team and the Rams happen to have the American Underdog movie come out right before the Super Bowl? I mean, it is what it is, Mark. I mean, despite the storyline, I mean, really you had just two good teams that put in two good situations. Matthew Stafford was really the trade of the year in 2021.
No doubt. And my thoughts about that in itself, I'm like, how did Matthew Stafford pull that out?
Really, it just came to a point where Detroit ate a lot of salary. I think they felt they owed it to Matthew Stafford, and they went ahead and did it. But where they did take those picks, they still had to eat a little bit of the bulk of the salary, which was what made it more feasible for the Los Angeles Rams.
And I think LA, if I'm being completely honest, in my mind, is the team to beat. Yeah,
in the NFC.
And they traded away Robert Woods, but they still have the Triple Crown winner in Cooper Kupp.
They bring in Allen Robinson,
who I wanted in Tennessee.
I mean, repeating in the league is difficult. I mean, we know how long it's been since the teams actually won back-to-back Super Bowls.
Early 2000s New England Patriots.
Exactly. So the parity in the league continues to be what it is, parity. It's difficult for a reason because everybody out there reloads, revamps, resigns. No team comes in the same every year. There's always a difference somewhere. Along the lines, you have to put the Rams at the favorite in the NFC, but in the AFC, it's a real slugfest out there.
Well, I've heard a lot of things where everybody's favorites to win the Super Bowl this year is Buffalo.
And Buffalo's a very trendy pick this year, especially with the additions that they made in the draft.
Von Miller.
Von Miller definitely was a great addition. But really, along those lines, one of the key things that people have to take into consideration for these teams to make that kind of run is health.
Yeah.
If they can't stay healthy, then you're not going to go anywhere.
Well, if you look at what Tennessee did last year, dressed over 90 players last season and still got the number one seed, what is that?
That's just a very good culture. If you can bring in people and they buy into your culture, then you're doing something right, and you rightfully deserve Coach of the Year for it.
And some of the guys we brought in last year, one guy I would love to have kept, Deontay Foreman.
And I know Foreman was definitely a punch in the stomach to everybody. So along the lines, he's getting a better starting opportunity in Carolina. And
with Christian McCaffrey every season's questionable. And, of course, there's a couple more guys that came to mind receiver-wise for Tennessee that they could possibly bring in. Maybe a guy like Cole Beasley.
Beasley's an interesting prospect, but I do feel he plays best in the slot position. And, you've already got Mason Kinsey. You've got Kyle Phillips that's potentially going to take that role. Yeah. So I really feel the addition of another slot receiver is kind of a head scratcher.
And then, of course, another name that I've recently came across that really makes sense to me, Emmanuel Sanders.
if he can play at least to get about maybe 700 yards in the season and a few touchdowns, I would consider that a success because Emmanuel Sanders, for the most part, has just been very wishy-washy.
And how old is he? Emmanuel Sanders is 35.
He's a very seasoned 35 for sure.
Like Emmanuel Sanders, no, Mark, no.
No.
But Emmanuel Sanders, he looks like he is still he plays like he is still in his mid to late 20s.
I mean, he's a serviceable player. I wouldn't expect him to be a game changer, but if he could go out and get some yards and move the chains a little bit, that's what I would expect from him. And Mark Jones brings up a good point. Yes, John Morant has been recruiting OBJ to the Titans. Will it happen? It's hard to say. I wouldn't get your hopes up too much on that.
And for me, it's all about the culture here. Does he fit the culture? No.
Not exactly.
OBJ is arrogant. And I'm going to quote Titans in Truth on one thing that he has said. It's going back to Keyshawn Johnson. It's not Keyshawn, it's Meeshawn. It's all about me with OBJ.
And as you said, culture is important with this team. You know, Mike Vrabel came in and shifted the locker room to have that winning competitive edge, and that's what this team does.
And everybody on this team, from the front office down, they've bought into what Mike Vrabel's doing.
And the biggest question is, can they continue to do it in order to secure a Super Bowl? That's the biggest question on every Titans' mind. But we've definitely got a long way to go before we'll see the results to it. But I think they could be close.
And I made a comment on the night of the NFL honors. I said, as long as Mike Vrabel is here, the Titans will always contend.
And I agree with that. When you find a coach that changes your culture and is able to get your players and your coaching staff to buy in, that's what makes everything better. That's what makes you successful. Mark brings up another point. Julio, he knows the offense. I don't see Julio coming back. When guys get cut loose from teams, it's rare that you ever see him come back. I don't think it was a bad situation, but along those lines, I think Julio's best days are behind him. If he can find a team to be serviceable with, I think that's more workable.
And the question is, and this is a question to you, if Julio goes anywhere, where do you see him going?
Really, it's only two teams. And the first would be San Francisco to reunite with Shanahan because that's when he had his best offensive years. And the second one would be with Green Bay.
Well, my number one team for Julio, I agree with the San Francisco because of the whole Shanahan connection. I would have to say Indianapolis.
And I know people say that because they want to see Matt Ryan and Julio get back together, and I just don't think it happens. I think there's some bad blood there that we don't know about. But there's a reason why he said some of the things about Ryan low-key when he left Atlanta. So I do think there are some underlining things going on there. Lou Man says Seattle. I mean, if they had a quarterback, that might help them.
Well, I'm going to say this. I've been seeing video of Drew Lock. Oh, my.
Well, the same thing happened, especially when the Seattle Seahawks brought in the one Green Bay quarterback, and I can't remember his name, before Russell Wilson took that job.
The only one I could think of is Matt Flynn.
Yes, that was Matt Flynn. Matt Flynn was having a very good offseason, and then Russell Wilson just started having a better training camp. And that's what basically moved the hand there. And Seattle paid a pretty penny to get him, too.
And hypothetically, another team I could throw in there as an honorable mention, probably Denver.
He could if he'd be willing to take a pay cut.
Because that receiving core ain't that good.
Yeah, you take Judy away, I mean, you're really missing some key holes in that receiving core.
Exactly. And if the Titans were to make a trade, which I don't see it happening, they could be sneaky into it. I would probably go to the Jets and get a young guy by the name of Elijah Moore.
Crazier things have happened, but if Tennessee did go to make a trade, I mean, most fans would probably want to see DK Metcalf, especially if the Seattle talks become broken down going forward.
Or another name that I could see, or a couple of names, Scary Terry McLaurin in Washington.
He'd definitely have to be locked in with a new contract in order to make that move. So you'd be potentially seeing the situation with A.J. Brown. I'd see that whoever would trade for him, they would have to give up at least a first-round pick, and they'd have to be willing to put in a new contract for him.
And, of course, I can see the comments on my end. One comment that I agree with is Mark Jones, Cordero Patterson.
I mean, that's a possibility if they wanted to engage in a trade. Patterson was one of the players that I opted to try and make a move for in free agency before he locked in a one-year deal. So if Tennessee wanted to trade for him, it could be a potential possibility.
Of course, in 2023, we do not have a lot of draft capital at all.
No.
We've got like 5 picks. So if I'm the Titans, one thing
I don't know, Mark. He could if he wanted to, but I don't.
Speaking of quarterbacks playing wide receiver, Ryan Tannehill.
Ryan Tannehill was a wide receiver in college.
He played his first 3 years at A&M as a wide receiver. And he knows the position very well. He knows this offense very well. Could I see Will Fuller?
If he's healthy.
Yeah, I was going to say if he's healthy.
I mean, it's a good deal if he's healthy. But it's rare when he does stay healthy.
Of course, with Will Fuller, I would give him a prove-it deal.
So you'd lock him in on a 1-year prove-it deal.
Yeah. If you can stay healthy, we'll extend you. If you can't, well, bye.
And I mean, that's probably what it'll come down to. A lot of the receivers on the open market right now, they could potentially get a 1 to 3 year deal depending on the circumstances.
Exactly. And I say if the Titans were to add another receiver, of course, with what's out there, like I said, you have guys like Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders is out there.
Mark, I don't think Todd Downing's that clever. Todd Downing's just too vanilla for that. If Arthur Smith were still here,
You would see some of that.
that would be very much the thing. But Todd Downing, we'll just have to wait and see. I hope there's improvement on Todd Downing's part, but there's
And
a
of
reason.
course,
There's a reason why they went out and hired Tim Kelly.
that's what I was fixing to say, because if you look at what Tim Kelly did in Houston, that team was a whole lot better passing.
David Mills was a legit threat at quarterback.
Oh, yeah. And like Tyrod beat us the first time around. And question, if Tyrod was to hit the open market next year, would you jump on him?
It would depend on the situation, to be honest.
If we were to part ways with Ryan after this season, if he has a bad year.
If you're going to part ways with Ryan, then it just tells me basically one thing, and that they believe that Malik's ready to take over the steering wheel. That would be the biggest reason why they let him go. So to bring in another veteran quarterback at that position, especially one that has a skill set as Malik does, I don't think it's a bad option. It's just making sure he understands that this is Malik's franchise now.
Oh, yeah. And of course, I'm looking to see what's left out there. OBJ still out there.
And Mark Jones brings up a good point with Josh Malone, where he was brought into camp.
I like Josh Malone. He's a guy that should give teams nightmares. Because can he be stealthy? Yes. Looking through here, of course, Will Fuller is a name that I would keep an eye on over the next going into training camp, along with, of course, Julio's another name I'd keep an eye on, see if he ends up somewhere, along with Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, maybe even Chester Rogers.
I mean, potentially. I mean, Rodgers did decent in the return game, but his health definitely scares me.
I was going to say, would you bring back Chester Rogers?
Honestly, at this point, I wouldn't, because I really like what Kyle Phillips brings to the table. And if he can stay consistent at what he's been doing, I could see him potentially being the return man for this upcoming season.
And, of course, you also have to look who else is in that wide receiver room. Mason Kinsey, Traylon Burks, Robert Woods, which if you look at what Robert Woods has done in minicamp, you would if you would have told me that he would have torn his ACL in November, I would have told you were lying.
I mean, the crazy thing was, you're exactly right. He didn't look like there's anything holding him back, other than just maybe the occasional day where he did wear a brace.
Like, he's going all out on everything. I'm like, Robert Woods, man, there's no way you tore your ACL.
From the eye visual point, no. For most of us that did get to see some of the OTA film and the minicamp film, it was just very much a situation that you're like, wow, this was definitely a situation where I didn't think it was potentially a guy that we were worried about his ACL. He's coming out and he's playing like there was never a problem at all.
Exactly.
And that's another great point, Mark. I mean, pollen levels are going to be on the decrease, and Traylon's asthma won't be an issue. And that's going to be a key point, I think, if he just practices an environment along with Ryan Tannehill and with Logan Woodside, just anybody that can throw him the ball while he's learning the playbook. That's his best asset right now.
And speaking of getting Traylon acclimated, I think even if you stay after practice with Traylon and even just work inside in the bubble and get him
Exactly.
acclimated to the playbook.
Agreed.
That's probably your best option.
I mean, at that point, it's an option that while he's learning the playbook, you also need to get him on the field, learning the routes, learning where he needs to be in his cuts and his
Yeah,
spots, everything along with that. It's the important
and
point going forward.
and and also building chemistry with Ryan.
That's the
That was the big problem last year with Julio. He didn't have the chemistry with Ryan.
and that's got to be the big selling point here. I mean, with Traylon Burks and also with Kyle Phillips,
Yep.
with Malone, the whole group of receivers coming in, they have to get that chemistry down. But I do have to say this. I feel a lot more comfortable this year about our tight end room than I did last year.
Oh, no doubt. When you add a guy like Austin Hooper, who was potentially a number one guy in Atlanta, and then went to Cleveland, where he was, like he was good in Cleveland, but he wasn't the Atlanta Austin Hooper.
Agreed.
And then drafting Chig Okonkwo.
If Chig goes along and has a really good training camp, he's going to contribute very early this year.
No
And
doubt.
from what I've seen, he has the tools. It's just developing the rawness.
And talk about the draft class a little bit. The thing I like about this draft class was that number one pick of Traylon Burks. If you go look at what he did at Arkansas, he should have went higher than that.
He turned the entire program around.
And
He was Arkansas's best player, bar none.
no doubt. And then look at what he's done, even just in the indoor facility. And like, if you just go look at what he's done indoor, that insane catch by Traylon.
That's the stuff you hope to replicate
Exactly.
on every Sunday. And if you can, that's where the success will be. And you really just hope, as a Tennessee Titan fan, that another drafted wide receiver can pan out in the first round.
Yes. And our biggest weapon is play action. And that is what Traylon thrived on at Oklahoma, or at Arkansas. I almost said Oklahoma, but Arkansas.
I mean, they look the same.
But
They look
yeah,
the same.
that's what Traylon thrived on at Arkansas, was that play action game.
And you're right. You're right, Mark. I mean, with those additions of Burks and Chig, I mean, this is an offense that's going to look completely different, but it's going to be a little more exciting going forward, because in these kind of situations, I think adding skilled tight ends, which was something that we just severely lacked on, was just a big hurting point for this team. Even though we felt that Anthony Ferguson could be the guy, it just wasn't going to be enough.
No doubt. And there's another comment I saw, and I think it was from Mark also. No, it was a Lou man. KJ Jefferson helped. And I agree. KJ, if he's there late in the first round, how can you tell me you would not take KJ Jefferson if he's there late in the first round?
If he was available, and if honestly, it really would have just depended on if his personality would have meshed with the others in the locker room. Because I think that's one thing we don't take into consideration. They're not just drafting for skill and talent. They're drafting for personality. They want to see if their personality and individualism fits in with what they're building.
And I agree. That's one thing that not many people look at. And if you were to go back and look at my draft stuff, I had um, Traylon as my number 4. Burks is my number 4 wide receiver.
And I think you're right. I mean, along those lines, Barks was either in the fourth or fifth in the wide receiving depth because, you definitely had three of the receivers. You had London, you had Wilson that were definitely going to be ahead of him for sure. But along the lines of just physical ability and just the kind of guy that attacks, Barks
Yeah.
just was the better of the three that went, in my opinion.
And then, of course, Malik was my number 4 quarterback, just ahead of Kenny Pickett.
So while you bring up Malik, and I think this is a pretty good point to finish on for the show, Malik Willis is definitely going to have all eyes on him, and it's going to be the big question of when or won't he. What do you think the best timetable is for Malik Willis going forward?
And I've talked about this with some other people. I've said that if Ryan struggles within the first 4 to 6 weeks, I say we go to Malik for at least a couple of weeks. Like I say, going to the bye week, if we're 1-3 or 2-3, 1-4, that's where in my mind you would go to Ryan.
And,
Not Ryan, Malik.
Right. And an interesting point, but the one thing that concerns me is for someone that's never had to organize an NFL huddle or call plays under center for extended amount of time and really know how to read a defense, if he's not on track for actually doing those things, do you feel comfortable throwing him in the fire, though?
Well, there's really only one way to learn, and it's to be thrown in.
But it's not always the best situation.
Yeah, and of course, in the NFL, one thing I've slowly learned it's sink or swim. And I feel like that's what we did with Mariota. Did he thrive? At times, yes. But did he struggle with injury a lot? Also, yes.
The biggest point I have to make with Malik is I can't throw somebody in the mix that doesn't understand how an NFL system works. And unfortunately for most college kids, they don't know. It's very rare when you get an athlete that has that kind of knowledge, like a Joe Burrow,
who did that a lot at LSU.
So in Malik's situation, he's where he needs to be. He's with the right people. I'm very high on the fact that Pat O'Hara's taking care of him in the quarterback room, that Tim Kelly's getting his handwork on him and basically helping him develop as a player. But it comes down to basically Pat O'Hara saying, until he understands how to command an NFL huddle and how to do the little things, that's the only way I'd feel comfortable putting him in that situation. Tom Brady didn't play until his second year in the league. Patrick Mahomes didn't play until his second year in the league. Sometimes waiting works.
And like if you look at Mahomes, as you said, he set his whole first season, pretty much his whole first year. He came in the last game of his rookie year, which that's typically what teams do if they've already got something locked up, is let their backup or whoever play the last regular season game. And I could see I see what you're talking about, is take and let him see it and develop. And I forgot who was talking. I forgot who was talking about this. I think the Titans carry 3 quarterbacks into the season.
It wouldn't surprise me. I think in
But
that situation, Malik, it would benefit him to hold the clipboard, wear the hat, and learn things how they has to handle himself
and
in NFL offense.
and somebody said have him tethered to Woodside, have him on Woodside's hip, and then when the offense is off the when the offense on the sideline, have him sitting right next to Ryan, looking at the tablet.
Well, that's exactly where he does need to be. Whenever Ryan's off the field, he needs to be like right on the bench, right next to him, right
Looking
with
at
Todd Downing, and right with the quarterback coach, looking at the printouts, seeing what they need to do.
exactly. And speaking of Pat O'Hara, he's a guy that I trust.
And I agree completely. I think Pat O'Hara is going to do a good job developing Malik, but it's going to go on Malik to get him to where he needs to go.
Exactly. And speaking of Pat O'Hara, a little fun fact about O'Hara. He's actually worked on movies before, sports movies. That's something I don't think many people knew about Pat O'Hara.
That's actually a fun fact. Any movies that anyone would know in particular?
Probably the game plan with Dwayne The Rock Johnson. He taught The Rock how to play quarterback. And The Rock was a defensive end at Miami.
That's true. And Lou, I mean, really, it's just Tannehill's going to show him the ropes, but he's not going to hold his hand through everything. Like,
Oh yeah, I
like
agree.
Tannehill said earlier, and I agree with this also. It's the coach's job to teach. Tannehill can show, but he's not a full-time teacher.
And basically, what Tanny was saying is that he's not going to sit there every step of the way. But what if I was Ryan? What I would do, I would show him, hey, this is how you have to be as a professional quarterback. This is how you need to conduct yourself. Which, if you've watched any of Malik's press conferences so far, I say in front of the media, he's handling himself very well.
Oh, agreed. Malik's coming off with a very professional edge to him. And so far, the whole quarterback room's getting along. They're learning together. What we've seen on film and with them on the field, they're taking it one day at a time, and everybody's getting along. So,
Yeah. But then when training camp hits, it's dog eat dog. It's every man. I would pay to see that.
That's where you would watch that on Versus, if Versus was still on. So
But
I mean,
yeah,
I would watch that if I would have the opportunity to.
I would watch Derek. I would love to see Derek rush the passer just once. Because Derek is such a big guy. We almost saw that against Houston. And then here came the flag.
I mean, I'm definitely on board if we can make that happen. So maybe we could start a hashtag campaign potentially in the off season. I mean, if Derek's going to work out, we might as well get a little bit of physical workout if we can get away with it. As long as it doesn't get him in trouble with the NFL. That's all that matters.
Training camp, here we come.
There we go. All right, guys. I want to thank everybody for joining the show tonight. It's great to see everybody in the chat just breaking down. I love when we get it active like this. Mark Jones definitely bringing an A game right along with Lou, man. You guys are bringing the big questions today. Love it. So I want to thank our special guest again, Lee Hillis, for joining us on the show tonight. It's great to have you in and get your insight, Lee. Just definitely want to make sure you get a chance to shout out to the fans and let them know where to find you tonight.
Yeah. As I said earlier on Instagram at the underscore 615 podcast. On Twitter is at podcast 615. And also on TikTok at Lee Hillis. And I'm going to kind of mention the roundtable one more time. June 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central. And of course, I'll put the YouTube link out there on Facebook and Twitter. And of course, our guest on that roundtable will be Jill Jelnick from Fox 17, Kayla Anderson from WKRN, which are both there in Nashville, and Jonathan Hutton from Outkick 360.
A full roundtable discussion, going to be a great time this upcoming Wednesday. Make sure that you check it out. Lee's going to bring all the hard-hitting questions, and we know he's not going to disappoint. And I want to thank everybody for joining us on the show tonight. And guys, I've got an announcement to make. This show may be over, but I'm not done, unfortunately. I'll be on another show tonight at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, the TSS Fantasy. Mr. Titan will be joining us, and another special guest will be joining the commissioner. He is going to definitely be bringing some trivia questions and asking us about the Tennessee Titans' upcoming season. So check us out at TSS Fantasy on their YouTube page at 9 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be a great show. Check it out on YouTube. So once again, I want to thank my guest, Lee Hillis from the 615 podcast. Lee, it's been too long. We definitely got to get you back on for the regular season when we get a chance to.
If I can find time. I've already started getting guests lined up. Fans of other teams.
Well, everybody else is getting ready to vacation. Guys like us, we're lining up for heavy hitting shows. So, Lee, Thank you once again. It's great having you on the show. Thank you for joining us, buddy.
No problem.
And I want to thank everybody once again for joining us on the show. And don't forget to subscribe, follow, and like on your way out if you're on YouTube. And check us out at the Power Hour 615 on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, TikTok, and on YouTube while you are watching. I'm Michael Bishop with the Power Hour. Take care and tighten up.